Hey, welcome everybody. So today we have the pleasure to be talking with HeathFoley. I actually met Heath in my classroom 2 years ago. He came for a board game design class to kind of like show his work, and we've been in touch since then. And I'm glad that he accepted to talk to you guys today. So Heath was a SCAD student. You graduated in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, sequential art, right? BFA of sequential art. And he is an illustrator, and he's also a game designer, and he has collaborated on two awesome projects. One of them is Wonder, which I absolutely love. And more recently, they shipped Shovel Knight, the board game. So Heath, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me so much. I appreciate it. I mean, last time we got a chance to, when I got a chance to visit your class, it was an absolute joy. That's before everything went a little crazy, but it was so much fun seeing all the students' projects and seeing all these finished pieces, which was fantastic because, I mean, obviously you're doing something right because some of those projects I was sitting there going like, man, these look really freaking professional. So I was really impressed. And, as someone, I mean, the biggest difference between me and your guys with as far as some of those finished projects went was I just happened to know the right people to talk to and happened to be able to get some money together to make these things made. That's the very cool thing about the board game industry is that right now there's, unlike a lot of other businesses, but I think maybe video games are kind of in the same category. There is this whole revolution of kind of like mom and pop garage style, small indie studios being able to make things. So with my old company, which is Panda Cult Games, we were formed up and I was part of it for 5 years creating, I was a art director and lead concept artist and production manager, financial manager, production liaison. Basically, board games are a funny industry, especially at the beginning, because you think you may be one thing, but that's just pigeonholing you into a position. You're actually going to have to do everything. And I mean everything. Like I basically entered the industry thinking like I want to draw and I have an idea for a board game, which let me see, let me pull it out here so you guys can actually see what I'm talking about. Oh god, it's heavy. All right. So this is Wander the Cult of Barnacle Bay. This is actually the first game that we produced, which is actually kind of psychotic. I would not recommend going this big out the gate. Oh God, I think this thing weighs 9.5 pounds and is full of miniatures and cardboard and cards and dice. I mean, the whole shebang, like everything everyone loves about board games. But as your very first one, we had to learn a lot. We had to learn so much from it. But the very first thing that we did is we basically just started out with a concept. Like I said, I was a concept artist in the industry for a number of years, about a decade or so. But I always had these designs in the back of my head, actually from a college project. Basically, animals and armor, things Utopia plus D&D. And I just love the designs, but I never had anything to do with it. So at one point or another, I got tired of drawing characters for other board game companies and then making $15,000 off of the Kickstarter stretch goal. And I decided, well, where can I get a chunk of that money myself? So my partner at the time and I decided to make Wander based off a bunch of designs that actually got turned into miniatures a couple of years ago with a little baby Kickstarter. I mean, it made, I think, $7,500, which is a lot, but it's also not a lot. But that actually exceeded my expectations. I was just trying to get 5 minis made, and I think we ended up getting 7. But those 7 were really cool, and everyone who picked it up from the Kickstarter kept asking the same question. Where's the game? Where's the game? Where's the game? So, I had a friend who basically worked at Cool Mini or Not for a number of years and helped development with their board games. So we kind of looked at each other and went, yeah, let's see what's up. And it really started off as just a casual project on afternoons and weekends. We had enough connections. He did video production in the board game industry, and he was head of game design, and I was kind of co-head of game design. He did the heavy lifting, but I kind of helped balance everything out. We like to compare it to he was designing like Dark Souls and I was designing like Disney. He was trying to kill everyone all the time, and I was trying to make sure the players had fun. And that's actually shockingly the balance in Wander pretty strongly. But yeah, like I was saying, it was a very casual afternoon thing. We didn't know where it was going to go, but we started getting some ideas down. We took things that we liked. I think Arcadia Quest was a big inspiration at the beginning, which is a cool Mini or Not game. They had this grid-based movement system, and we really, really, really liked that. But then we basically took these minis that I already had produced from that Kickstarter and used those as stand-ins. And then everything else was just like bits and pieces that we were stealing from other games, as far as like just testing materials, not actually rules and stuff. Don't steal rules. People will know and they will tag it very quickly, trust me. Because most of this stuff, it's like, oh yeah, this is from that, got it. But yeah, it's kind of funny how quickly, if you have an idea for a board game, it's funny how quickly putting pen and paper down on a table will help flesh that thing out, because our first set of rules were garbage. They did not work. They were completely dysfunctional, but it was fun. Like, you chuck dice and all of a sudden you realize you're wiping out a swatch of monsters at once. It's like, well, that's too much. Or like 3 monsters group up on you and your guy dies instantaneously. And you're like, all right, that's not quite balanced enough. But through basically brute force testing, which by that I mean we beta tested, we had like 6 or 7 hour sessions where we like hang out and cook meals and take little breaks and play video games and pull out other board games that we'd play for inspiration and things like that. But basically 3 or 4 times a week we'd get together, we'd draft some new ideas. Since I was the art guy, I like started coming up with character cards and dashboards and started fleshing out the tiles, and basically came up with some of the very basic ideas of how these things worked. But it was interesting how, again, putting things on a table and seeing how they function really started changing the game and how it operated. And we eventually got down to a point where we were getting like pretty serious about it. Like very seriously thinking like, oh, well, we have something on our hands. We need to try and see if we can do something with this. So we went to our very first convention as a company, Adepticon, which is a big Warhammer gaming convention. I think they used to have a painting competition, but now it's gotten taken over by the Golden Demon, which is Games Workshop's big painting competition. I know a bunch of miniature painters. That's the only reason I'm bringing it up, which are good people to know, because they will. My partner's wife is a professional miniature painter. She was actually really good at painting chibis. So the hilarious thing is that, I'd come up with some of these designs and I'd show it off to them. And, obviously my partner had his opinions, but then his wife would come up and say like, oh, well, it would be more fun to paint these if you chose like these 2 colors, or if you offset this, because, I think of designs like, full size on a screen, zoomed in. She thinks of the designs like this big. So that was an interesting contrast piece of like, well, I'm designing big, she's thinking small, and then we combined them together and we came up with a lot of really fun stuff. Although they came up with a nickname for me during the design process, which was Heath Two-Tone Foley, because I like to choose like 2 color tones, and that was like the thing for the entire character design. Also, I shouldn't be allowed to write character backgrounds. Everyone was Batman. Everyone's an orphan who like had vengeance in their heart. Just ridiculous. Yeah, I think the main character in the game, Roland, is actually still an orphan, but I think everyone else has got parents and a happy childhood. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head. But that's part of the fun of it, is like, designing these characters and having them kind of come to life in your head. And then all of a sudden we have this giant world that we can start putting them in. So I got sidetracked. So Adepticon. So we showed up to Adepticon, and basically we had used savings, we had borrowed money from family to basically get a couple of, because we had the base heroes sculpted for the game from that Kickstarter I was telling you guys about, but we had no enemies. So we were like, well, we have to have bad guys to fight. And the funny thing was, so there's 4 base bad guys in Wander. which was a basic melee unit called a grunt, a range character called a cat, or called the archers, which was like a rabbit with a tentacle that threw spikes. It was going to be a rat whose neck unfurled and like shot needles from its neck, but again, Disney, we needed to actually have it so kids could play this game. It would have been a cool freaking design, but it's a little too aggressive. Oh yeah, we got some reference photos. What's up? So let me see. Yeah, so if you click on that 436 web picture one, I can probably point out some of those bad guys. Oh yeah.
I just grabbed these on the website.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's web pictures, so I cannot. It's not opening in my usual.
I'll tell you what, it's not like I don't have a giant box sitting right beside me with these characters actually physically here. Oh God, it needs to open. It's not. I'm almost sweating handling these things. Good God.
The minis are absolutely gorgeous, and I love.
That's actually part of the one of the things I was getting ready to get into. Is our sculptor is actually a legendary guy in the business, Patrick Heath. He's amazing. But he, like, all of these miniatures are hand sculpted. Like, the go-to nowadays is 3D printing and 3D sculpting, which is what we did for Shovel Knight for sure. But for Wander, we were like, we knew this guy. He was like our industry uncle. That's the way I like to refer to him. And yeah, we started coming up with some fun designs. And I don't know how well you guys can see this, but this is like an otter grunt. So it's a little, it's like an otter with like a crab claw. The whole concept behind the game is it's like, what if Innsmouth, the H.P. Lovecraft story, mixed with Zootopia? So then all of a sudden it's like, you know, mutated otter, crab, melee enemies, and then rabbits with a tentacle arm with giant spikes on it that flings it at the distance. And there's actually, the Kickstarter went well enough that we got some alternate sculpts in too. So here's a nun bunny with a crossbow, the little messed up tentacles coming out the dress. Let me see. The alternate crab fisherman is hilarious. It's like a fisherman's wife with a frying pan. And one of my favorites though is the Batcaster, just because the like actual shape and design of it is great. He's got a fish tail and wings and all that stuff. It was just a lot of fun to do. And I gotta get out. Oh God. Make sure you got some enemies too. So one of the things that we were got a lot of attention for are these guys, the bear sharks. And I mean, this isn't a small model. I mean, this is a big boy. We said it was like 32 millimeter scale. That may have been a lie. But yeah, something about, we were like, what's the scariest thing we can think of? And it's like, what if a bear and a shark had a baby? And we were just like, yep, that 100%. And just to let you guys know, the enemy design process is not perfect. My first sketch of this was a sad, wet rat. Like, that's what it looked like. I was like, what's a shark and a bear? And I tried to give it a bear nose, but I tried to make it look tortured. And it looked like a sad, beefy rat that was wet. Like, that's it. So it wasn't a great design overall. So then eventually we just scrapped it and did something. I was like, all right, bear with shark head. And then that's what ended up happening. So, yeah, so, and you can see some of the, like, that's actually an example of the board. That's basically what we had at Adepticon. So this is an example of the intro scenario, or one of the intro scenarios, where you have your heroes who are in teal right there, and they basically go around and can move a certain amount of spaces, on this grid, and go and get attacked by enemies. But as soon as an enemy sees the players, they're considered activated, and they start tromping around the board and start coming after you like the game. So the game's enemies are all automated. As long as they follow a simple set of rules, they'll just start coming at you. So it's very, very cool. It's very intuitive. Like, if you follow the rules for how the enemies work and you can kind of gun the system, it's so much freaking fun. And then this is an example of the character dashboard. So the idea is, on the left, you'll see 0 through 25. So that's the experience of these characters. So the idea is that every enemy that they take down, it's worth 1 to 2 experience. So it doesn't sound like much, but when you're on a board with like 20 enemies barreling down on you, it can kind of add up. So as these characters gain experience, if you see on the character card, they have the same tiers on the character card as they do in the experience. So as you unlock those tiers in the experience, you actually unlock new abilities per scenario. The idea being that, like, let's say you've got a team comp of a melee, a range, a caster, and a tank. Well, that's a pretty solid team comp. But let's say you have 2 melee characters and 2 range characters. Not so strong on the defensive front. So Roland here can actually kind of switch hit and go more of a defensive role if you wanted to, instead of a attacking role. So that was part of the concept. So the whole game, your character levels up per scenario, but the overall game, your gear is really how the character's leveled up. Because we were trying to find a way to, like, if you wanted to do a scenario that was go rescue the mayor, well, you may want to be more tankier to kind of absorb hits because you're trying to defend this mayor who's running through town trapped in a barrel. And if you don't follow him around, he'll get attacked by enemies and die. Then on the other side of things, you may want him to be more assault heavy if it's like go attack this target, or like I think there's one mission where an otter runs around the edge of the board, and if he hits this lever, then he floods the town. So you're racing trying to like beat him to this lever, and killing enemies as fast as possible is like the best way to do that. And this is that chalk right up there. That's an example of a boss card. So we actually have boss fights here. Let me see. So here's chalk. So the idea is it was a witch doctor tree frog who killed an ancient nautilus, took its shell and wore it on her head. She's the reason. So the elevator pitch is the town is shrouded in darkness and dark magics, and all the local villagers are being transformed into these fish hybrid monstrosities. And your job as a team of wanderers is to go into the town, which is, think of it like a heroes guild, is to go into this town and find and put an end to the source of the corruption. So she is a big part of it. So there's all these like darkness spaces that you're not quite sure what's in there. So Chalk is actually a character who summons in those darkness spaces, and then her boss fight, which you can see that deck to the right. So that's her boss card. But if you scroll down a little bit, that's her actual boss deck. So you basically pull a card per turn, or every time it's her turn on the initiative board, you pull one of those cards, and then it'll do something different. So there's a deck of, I think, 10 to 12 cards. And every time you go through the full deck, you shuffle it up. So you know what her attacks are, but you don't know what order they're coming in. So that way it keeps the boss fights kind of fresh and unique every time you go through it. We actually, I think we did a hardcore like bonus fight at a convention one time where you fought all of the bosses in a rush. And then at the end, because it's Panda Cult Games, we had a mini specifically for a boss called Pandulu, and he was ferocious. Like, we literally had someone tell us that they beat him, and we were like, "What?" The guy was ridiculous. Like, we made the fight so incredibly unfair. We literally told the players, pick any hero, pick any item from any deck, and fight them. And if you can beat them, tell us, because we'd love to know. Because it was like that last Kickstarter stretch goal of like, we're out of ideas at this stage. So, here, this is the most insane thing we can think of. And players beat it. One guy in particular, I remember, he was one of our super fans. He loved the game. I think he ended up paying me to get him a custom character design, which is actually pretty cool. He chose like a Dragonborn paladin kind of looking character, which is really fun. But yeah. So we ended up taking this game to Adepticon. Basically, what you're looking at is one of the intro boards. And yeah, we found an artist that we knew from another project to do the tile artwork. We had me doing all the graphics and all of the item designs and character designs, and we had our sculptor friend. The funny thing is we only had 3 models, 3 enemy models at the time, which were the otter grunt, the archer, and the batcaster, and the no, not the batcaster, the bear shark. And that's all we had. We didn't have the batcaster, so we were like missing a huge element of the base enemies. But the game was still like the hit of the show that year, which kind of surprised us. We were sharing booth space with some friends of mine who ran a company called On the Lam Games, and I felt kind of bad because like we were getting a lot of attention, which let me tell you, if you're sharing a booth with someone and you're getting a lot of attention in their booth, that's good for them too. Because then people go to their booth as well because they just saw your cool thing and then they want to see other cool things near you. Like it's a win-win. But I felt a little bad because like we were getting swarmed and then they'd kind of look over their direction. I think that's the point when like we were getting focused on so hard. I was like, we've got something here. Although I felt a little bad, we were playing like piratey music on a speaker system. Oh no, wait, that was Shovel Knight. Yeah, you got to be considerate at conventions with your people, your neighbors with, because we were playing Shovel Knight video game music where we were demoing Shovel Knight. And the guy at the booth next to us, just after 2 days, came over and was like, "Can you stop playing the music?" And we're just like, okay. But no, yeah, Wonder turned out to be a surprise hit for us. And after that convention, I mean, like, my partner and I were in the, like, it's weird to think, like, we're two guys who built this in, like, my crappy little apartment. And then we're at a convention showing it off, trying to imitate the big boys. And then it goes off so well at this convention that we're like hugging and crying in the parking lot, like because it's gone so well. We had no idea. It was just this like ridiculous dream we had, and then suddenly it's a real thing that we're starting to put in front of people and they're responding to. That part was super freaking cool. And then we started touring conventions and putting together a Kickstarter and trying to figure out some things. And I think we ended up making $230,000 on Kickstarter to fund this thing. Or actually, I think it was 230 by the end. Like I think it was 170, and then through back end stuff, it was 230. And yeah, we dumped every penny of that into this board game. I will tell you guys right now, it's a lot. It's a whole lot of effort because creating the thing, getting sculpts done, all of that, like that's the funnest part of the process. But then there's the technical side of things. You gotta start thinking about accessibility. You gotta start thinking about the items you're using and the cardboard thickness, designing these tiles and cards and characters and things, but not just for like, I'm going to cut it out with some scissors and glue it to a piece of cardboard. I need to produce hundreds of thousands of these and put them into production somehow. It sounds intimidating, but once you kind of learn the ins and outs of it, it gets a lot easier over time. I'm not going to ever say it's easy, but it gets a lot easier over time. Like by the time we got into Shovel Knight, I knew so much more, but that game had a whole different tier of complications that went with it because it's a licensed property. And are you guys familiar with Shovel Knight, the video game? All right, cool. I assume so, but I also don't want to like make a fool of myself by just going like, everyone knows this thing we loved. Yeah, my partner and I, that was funny. So we got done with Wander, and we were wondering what our next project was, which hilariously was a licensed game we worked on with IDW called Ghostbusters versus Men in Black Ecto-Terrestrial Invasion. Which, if I'm right, I think Shovel Knight came out around the same time as that one. But yeah, that was a game we were just doing design work on, which was a whole lot of fun. But yeah, so this is Shovel Knight. We so obviously we played the game and we played co-op on it and just enjoyed the crap out of it. And I remember we were sitting there thinking like, man, this would be so much fun to produce for. This would be so much fun to produce a video game. Oh, hold on a second.
I muted.
I think my audio died.
There is no sound. I muted the sound so that it would not do it over you speaking. Everything's good?
All right, let me see. All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, cool. Sorry. I think I got my headphones and they just died. So
oh, gotcha. Yeah, and I was telling you that there is no sound. I cut the sound so that it would not kind of like speak over you, but I was thinking that we could show the video.
Oh yeah. No, don't worry about it. Yeah, Shovel Knight though. It's that was funny. Like I said, my partner and I were playing the game co-op, and we kind of were like, man, we could make a really fun board game out of this, because we had an idea for a game. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Power Stone 2 for the Nintendo Dreamcast. I'm just old enough that like I know it, but it was this amazing. It's like Smash Bros. Before Smash Bros. Or Smash Bros. Around the same time as Smash Bros. If I remember right. But it was basically like a flat platform, and your characters all just beat each other up and knocked each other off, and you ran and grabbed items and did all this cool stuff. So we were kind of coming up with like, what if Power Stone 2 was a board game? And then we started playing Shovel Knight, and we were just like, oh man, like the 2D side-scrolling aspect of Shovel Knight would be really cool. Like, what if you had this game where there's multiple Shovel Knights? Because in the game as co-op, you can actually knock each other around and knock each other in the pits and bounce off of each other. And we're like, that'd be fun. And then a buddy of ours who actually did a lot of the writing for Wander contacted us, and we were like, well, this would be a cool thing to do. And he was like, well, why don't you email him? And we were like, that's an option? He was like, yeah, email him. So we're like, okay. So, you know, we got 2 games under our belt at that point, Shovel Knight Dungeon, or we Wander and the Ghostbusters game. So, you know, we it's a shot in the dark. So we emailed them and said, hey, you know, we got this board game idea. What do you guys think? And they're like, yeah, sure, send us a prototype, see what's up. So we're like, oh God, all right. So we basically, I think we got a Shovel Knight model, 3D sculpted and printed from some of our friends, and just put together some super basic tiles. And let me tell you, I did pixel art for those tiles, and I loved it. I had so much fun doing pixel art, but yeah, they ended up not being on board for that, purely due to the fact that their lead art director is like, he teaches pixel art character design, and he was very specific about how he wanted things to look, and what basically told me, he was like, it's going to be easier if you don't use pixel art, because like we're going to be a lot more gentle on you. And I was like, okay. But yeah, we sent him literally some tiles, a board we glued together, a couple of basic cards with some super basic art we basically scrapped from the internet. And the game's got coins that you can collect, like you saw him hopping around with the gold coins there. We sent him pennies. We sent him literally a roll of 50 pennies for the coins, and made a joke like, we're paying you to play our game, pennies, which they got a kick out of. But yeah, I mean, after about 2 weeks of back and forth, they were like, no, we love it, we want you guys to make it. So we're like, okay. So then my partner, who's never written a contract for licensing, wrote a contract for licensing. And yeah, googling things is your friend. But yeah, we already had a proven product on our hands that was very well received, so these guys had a lot of faith in us. So we're like, cool. So all of a sudden we're working on Shovel Knight Dungeon Duels, and they really love the concept of it. You know, each character, you can basically play as any of the Order of No Quarter and Shovel Knight and some of the other friends like Shield Knight and the Bard. And I mean, at one point we wanted to make a hero for the Horse Villager, but we just ran out of time and funding. But yeah, we just ended up kind of going bonkers. Like, all the characters have really basic stats, and they had really basic abilities that were kind of mirrored from what they did in the game. And it was just after Wander, which is a pretty heavy game, and the Ghostbusters Men in Black, which is basically a PvP engine. We were looking for something light and fun, and Shovel Knight was exactly that. Like, it was like 15 to 30 minutes per game, and you just bounce around the map and beat up friends and steal their coins and use items and play as your favorite characters from the game. And we have this really ingenuitive system, which you can see here. There's these individual tiles on a track. So we were like, well, how do you do a side-scrolling game? And then we were like, well, what if we made individual slices, like these vertical slices of like 1x4 tiles? And as you are moving through the level, one tile moves off the left side of the board, and another tile from a shuffled deck of tiles moves from the right. So you constantly keep the movement of the level going, replicating the side-scrolling aspect. And then beyond that, if you were facing, say, Spectre Knight, all of a sudden you would take Spectre Knight's level tiles, shuffle those in as well, and then suddenly it's like you always start with the starter area just to build up some gold and get some basic enemies in. And then all of a sudden you're throwing in Spectre Knight stuff where you're having to like, I think in the Spectre Knight game, you could attack lanterns and you could like daisy chain them together to kind of move through the level. So we had that, but every time you hit a lantern, the card would flip over and then it would turn into a spike pit trap. So like you would end up like one character would daisy chain through and you couldn't follow their path anymore. You'd have to try and jump over the spikes, which was kind of a tricky idea to do. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to eventually produce. And then like I was also we were kind of tongue in cheek about it at the beginning process because we wanted to seem bigger than we were. So all of this art assets, all of the sculpted models and stuff, like that's all my artwork. Like the icons, the logos, outside of anything that's like licensed to them, like the actual Shovel Knight artwork and the pixel art, like that's all their stuff. But the tiles, a lot of that stuff, a lot of the end game character designs, to get them to a sculptable state, that was all me. So it's not just like take their existing art and throw it on a card. It's take a design they've done and figure out a way to make it 3D, which let me tell you, getting a really, really stylistically 2D art game and art assets like Shovel Knight is a very challenging thing to turn into a 3D model. Which the great thing was is we knew this guy who was a chibi sculptor. His name was Heriberto Valle Martinez. He's one of my favorite people on the planet to work with. All the artists I've worked with have been great. God, their positive attitude, like in horribly broken English, made my day every single time. Because like they had the best attitudes about everything. But there was one point where I think it was the tile artist on Wonder, Jose David Lanza. Great guy, amazing dude. He works out of, I think he's from Spain, and he tried to use an American idiom of we're gonna really slap some meat on the grill. Like I think he's trying to say let's get cooking, but he's like we're gonna slap the meat on the grill. And so like for months I was like, yep, slapping meat on this grill, let's go all day.
And I can totally empathize on this.
Oh yeah. It's not like the English language is actually an easy thing to learn. We have 5 words that mean the same thing, and then we have 1 word that's used 5 ways. So I get it. I can't speak 2 languages. I can poorly speak German. And basically all I can say is, where's the airport? And David Hasselhoff is sexy. Like, that's it. But yeah, no, Shovel Knight was an adventure in its own. The funny thing is when we were at, oh God, what was it? So we went to PAX East, the big one. And we were actually invited out by Yacht Club Games, who we were working with very closely. That was an amazing experience. So we went out to Seattle, we hung out. I had a friend that lived out there and I visited her, but like so at that stage we had launched a Kickstarter and it launched at a really bad time. It was Labor Day weekend and a couple other things. You'd think a title like Shovel Knight would automatically just like, boom, fireworks, funding. No, timing and a lot of other factors went into play. So our first Kickstarter actually failed on that, which is important to know because it's a blow, but you got to know how to recover from it. Because like, you know, it's a little different than when you're working on a project because, you know, in the real world, we had put serious money on this thing. Like we had put a lot of money of our own personal funds down. Like at a certain point, we stopped paying ourselves so we could put more money into Shovel Knight to get it produced because by all accounts, it was supposed to be bigger than Wander, which it ended up being. I remember now Wander, instead of 230, that was the end funding on Kickstarter for Shovel Knight. Wander only did 170, but Shovel Knight did 230, which doesn't sound like a lot when you think of these multi-million-dollar campaigns, but when it's 2 dudes, it's a ton of money. And then afterwards, I think for pre-orders and a couple other things, I think it ended up at like $330,000, which again, I'm not saying this like to try and like impress you guys. Here's the fact is that 330, it was about $250,000 to $290,000 of that money went to production. And by that, I mean, producing the game, paying for sculpts, paying for tooling for the sculpts, shipping. And by the way, this is when COVID hit. This is, we were shipping in the middle of 2021. So there was freight container shortages. There was production issues because COVID knocked out production in China. So then suddenly everything got backlogged. So then our project was pushed back 6 months. And then there's a container shortage. So all of the freight got interrupted. So freight became a commodity that was then doubled in price. So when you're thinking about shipping games across the, like, this isn't just shipping. This is like just getting it to a shipping depot from manufacturing. It went from $20,000 to $40,000, like that. So like you're thinking of, like, when you're thinking from a business perspective, like we've made some money on this, right? $20,000 gone in a moment. That's not trying to scare you guys off of this. This is why we should have started small on like a card game or something that doesn't involve minis and is a big heavy box. Like we made big chunky games and that was the goal, right? And we did that very successfully. But there is a lot of the realities of production are pretty hairy ultimately. Also, you got to learn maybe not to necessarily listen to customers and backers all the time and make what you have envisioned, because we did that. And we had a lot of people make a big claim, like if we had a lower price point that they would absolutely get in. And so we made the 2D Shovelry Pledge and made a version of it that didn't have models because retailers were super excited about it. Guess what they didn't buy? You'll see here. So 2D Shovelry Pledge, 265 backers. Fair amount, you know, that I think, you know, that was decent. But look at the $70 one, 1,428 backers. We should have just not made it an option ultimately, but we didn't know, and we learned after the fact. It's just funny things you learn as you go. Businesses will make mistakes, but
I can guarantee that I would buy the 3D one over the 2D one.
Yeah,
absolutely. Minis, like, come on.
You get the cool like 3D versions of these great character designs. Who I met the actual character designer that they hired to do these. He is the funniest, mousiest little dude I've ever met in my life. He was so intimidated. I don't know what, like intimidated of me. I was a tabletop artist. He's the Shovel Knight guy. Like I could have sworn he was going to just come in and be like, oh, so you work on board games? But no, he was like, hi, I did these designs. It's great. Don't worry about it. And I was just like, these are good. And he's like, oh, I don't think they are, but thank you. And I was like, dude, be proud of yourself. He went, and like scampered off. I'm not kidding. He actually legitimately did that. And I looked at him, and it was funny that the guys from Shovel Knight saw some of my other work, and they were like, could you do this for us in a future project? And I saw that dude's like bug eye because he was just like, don't take my job. And I was like, I couldn't dream of taking your job, dude. Yeah, and I think he's still rocking amazing designs for them to this day. I think they just came out with Shovel Knight Dig, which is like a roguelike version of Shovel Knight, and I mean his designs for that are great too. So it's really cool. But yeah, that's a lot of my actual board game experience. Besides that, I've just been doing concept art in the industry for a long time. It feels like, well, it doesn't, and it does. It's like I've been doing it for 10 plus years with 500-ish designs actively being used. But it seems like it was the blink of an eye. Like I started back in about 2009, 2010, I think. Yeah, an old buddy of mine from a senior level project was like, hey, this board game company is looking for designs. Do you want to do them for me? And I was like, sure, why not? I was working a temp job doing like IT work at a school system. And yeah, I think my first 3 designs I charged $30 a piece for. And I spent like 4 hours plus on each, you know how these things go. And yeah, ended up tooling around with those guys for a while, went to a convention, met some bigger players in the industry who liked my stuff and gave me a chance, which is pretty cool. That's the nice thing about board games from an artist standpoint is there's a lot of companies creating a lot of things. And there's a good chance that they could use extra artists on a lot of those things. I know that was the case for me, so that was really cool. But anyways, I've rambled on and on as I am prone to do. But no, I would absolutely love to hear your guys' questions and see if you got any questions for me. I guarantee you I have answers, and I'll do my best not to be horrifically biased.
Go for it, guys. Ask away.
Is it just free range then?
Yeah. Just make sure that nobody else is talking, and then go for it.
Can I start with a question?
Sure.
Jack.
I actually really want to get into the industry as well, and I quickly went through the your company's profile, and I found out before you talked a lot about knowing people and experience, and I found out your partner worked for Simon Games.
Yeah.
And how do when we graduate and first start, how do we get into industry, or how do we get the connection to know people to get started? Because it seems so important.
So for everyone, it's a little bit different. But I'll tell you my perspective, because I feel like from the artistic side of things, it's pretty traditional. It's going to be, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be a little tough right now due to COVID. Conventions, if you can find yourself at a convention, one of the big ones like Adepticon's decent, but you want to go to something like Origins or Gen Con, some of the bigger conventions around the country where you're going to have everyone, not just like, because Adepticon's really big Games Workshop show. And those guys, it's like Blizzard, like they have the money to hire whoever they want, so they're going to get the cream of the crop. Well, guess what? That's a tiny percentage of artists. Trust me. And I've actually met some of those guys. Really cool. All of them are cool. But the biggest thing is that I found in my experience was going to conventions and showing my portfolio to art directors or people who could connect me to art directors. Because the truth is that I was the art director for Bandicoot Games, and I loved looking at portfolios because we had something like 4 or 5 projects lined up that, there's a certain point that I couldn't do everything myself. So, I started looking at other people with portfolios, and even like younger artists who don't have a lot of development experience, but, I knew was talented enough to work in the industry with like a little bit of hand holding, that's all doable. Like board games are interesting in the fact that they're willing to give you a chance if you're flexible enough to be able to work with them. So my suggestion is if conventions are live and something you feel secure enough doing, is to try and go to these shows, make face-to-face contact from a safe distance while masked. But to go to these conventions, try and make contact with art directors or people who can connect you to art directors, and try and bring your portfolio in a very succinct, like 12-image version of it. Show them the best of your work. Try and focus on one singular aspect. Like if you want to design characters, show characters. If you want to do illustrations, show illustrations. Like I got work with Privateer Press because I didn't show a Wiley portfolio that had 18,000 different versions of things in it. I showed them an incredibly focused, this is my background character design. I wasn't going to be their front-facing art. They had amazing concept artists already. I was going to be on the back lines designing characters for their armies. So like that's the kind of stuff I focused on. So like I said, shaking hands, have a business card ready, easy contact information. Don't be afraid to have a piece of your artwork on said business card, but to have a pretty succinct portfolio with you on it. And board games are different than video games. You're not going to get a desk job doing it. It's a lot of freelance work. And the best way I can suggest is that if you can start getting into the industry and start showing that you have work for a company, it gets a lot easier after that stage. That's what happened with me. I had some work, and then I showed it off to a company and said, hey, these guys trust me. You should trust me too. And they're just like, yeah, sure. So then, all of a sudden I got locked into a Kickstarter they did and was doing 7 character designs a day. That's insane. Don't do that. But no, that's the best advice I can give is, strangely enough, having a decent personality, even if you have to fake it, and shaking a hand and being on time, polite, and have a decent amount of money that you want to work for. Like, don't undercharge. You're hurting everyone by doing that. Don't do $30 for a character design like I did. You should charge a proper amount for your time, which you guys need to figure out for yourselves what that amount is. Like at this stage, I can charge $250 for a character design. And that's like a full color with a turnaround sheet. But that's because I've been doing it for 10 years. And I've got enough credentials behind me that I can throw that number around. But yeah, long story short, that's my suggestion, is try and make face contact if you can.
Awesome.
I
Troy,
have a. Oh,
wait, I think Troy had a question. He had his hand
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Just real quick. Well, thank you for the presentation, in general. If you already made a board game, like what was the process of getting it published, or how did you go about that?
So there's two ways of doing that from my experience, which was, well, when you say published, do you mean self-published or published through a company?
because it's self-published. Both of them are self-published by Pinnacle Game, correct?
Yes, but the Ghostbusters one was published through IDW, so I've got experience on both ends. I'll give you the examples on both.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
with self-publishing, the biggest challenge was with publishing through a company, if you have a board game ready, like if you got art assets and design and everything ready, you may be able to approach a company and say, hey, I've got a board game that I'd like to pitch to you guys. Like you can either cold call, email. I don't guarantee that they'll respond, as is with most jobs in the creative industry. You may get ghosted and you may get a response. A lot of it has to do with luck, but beyond that, like with the last question, is try and get to a convention, because at the big shows, they're getting designers to come to, they're looking for people to bring on to do projects, and they all can't hire like the legends, like oh god, like Eric Lang, for who did a lot of stuff for CMON. Like that guy's making big projects for a lot of people, but there's room. If a game's fun, it's going to be noticed, and everyone kind of knows that. So if you have a prototype, a quick, easy, like with Wander, huge game, right? But we have an intro scenario that we can get someone through in 15 to 30 minutes. So having a simple version of it that's like an elevator pitch, but in a box, that's a key thing to have to kind of show off your game. And a lot of the guys that are looking at games at conventions, which you can sometimes, they'll have like open curtain calls kind of for, like you can get in a line and show off your game, or you can talk to someone about putting a game in front of them. I knew a guy who was responsible for all the games at IDW, hence how we got that project. And he basically looked at us and he was like having a conversation, but I literally watched him get pitched 5 games in a row. And like he had to go through, and he maybe had 5 minutes per game. And it was just a gut call at that point of like, no, this has got some potential. Yeah, we'll talk. Or this doesn't. Maybe you should work on this, and you keep moving on. So like I said with the last question, going to a convention, trying to meet the right people, which most of these places are friendly. You can say, hey, I'm a game designer, or I'm a new game designer, but I have a game I'd like to pitch. Is there someone I could show this to? If they don't have the time, that's fine. Move on to someone else. There's always opportunities, and you don't have to just go for the big boys. I went with like tiny mom and pop companies, and I got all the way up to a private tier and working with D&D stuff. You got to climb the ladder a little bit to get up there, but some professionals' credit is better than none, and producing a game is better than not producing it. So, but that's getting it published through someone else, which then there's a whole complicated world of contracts and percentages that you get and upfront payments, but I won't get into that. That's a little bit more of an involved conversation. The other side of things is self-publishing. That is involved because you don't have a publisher that's going to handle promotion, manufacturing, and shipment. That's all on you. So you've got to start doing social media campaigns for yourself, promoting things and creating content. You've got to put out teasers and art assets. You've got to regularly post things and follow algorithms, or things won't be able to get seen, which is just posting at the same time every day religiously. Beyond that too, it's finding manufacturers, which the good news is that a lot of the big conventions like Gen Con, especially Gen Con, the big manufacturers will be there, and they'll be looking around, they'll be touring, and they'll have their own booth. Most of these big producers are out in China, so that is going to be your mass production portal there. And that's just grand scale things. Like There's ways to do card games that are US based production. It's going to be more expensive per box, but the truth is that if you can get something produced, printed, and put in a little cardboard box here, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and energy. And also, it's going to sound strange. You can slap a produced in the USA sticker on your box, and some people will see that as like a giant boost to sales. I don't know why. The industry is made of people from all political spectrums, and you're going to have the older gamers who lean one way and the younger gamers who lean another way, and they're all going to want your product, which is another hint. Don't say anything political ever, because why lose a sale? Like if someone wants to buy your box to burn it, fine, they still bought your box. Like ultimately, try and stay away from that stuff as much as you can, unless you're making a game about political statements, then have your fun with it. But no, self-production is more about marketing your own product, putting it out in front of the world, finding a publisher, finding a shipping partner, and going from there. That's basically what we did, and we had to learn the hard way. Like we had to talk to companies, and a lot of stuff is kind of closely guarded secrets, who uses who for production and what uses what. Like for an example, I'll be wide open with you guys. We used a manufacturer called Long Pack Games over in China. The communication was tough because English is a second language to them, and I wish I knew Mandarin, but I don't. So I had to rely on English translation and a couple of other things to get through that process. But those guys helped me through that process pretty gratuitously. They knew what they were talking about, and they helped me, like for Wander, they helped me set up our tile trays and our miniature trays, so like it's a nice tightly packed box that's not going to explode, because they want to make as good of a product as they can so they can get more work. Because like 100,000, like when we sent Wander over there and like $130,000 of our money, that's not going to lie, chump change to them. It's enough that they want to like keep working with you to keep the games going, but they're also getting 10,000 unit orders while we were like looking at 2,000, right? So, but that was Long Pack. And then there's another company called Panda Games. Panda actually has got a giant US based group for communicating that'll kind of like middleman the project for you. So Panda's a really good option for self-production as far as the physical game goes. And then beyond that, there's also a series of companies that do Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping. And with Kickstarter, you guys have seen Kickstarter is a fundraising program. That's how a lot of smaller companies can kind of raise funds quickly. It's also its own marketing engine. Because think about it this way. You're a new creator, you want to make a game. You want to make a certain amount of product for your game. Well, how much do you make? Who knows? Are you going to bank a ton of money from a bank loan on a guesstimate? That's how it used to go. You used to say, well, I'm estimating 25,000 people want this product. Well, 2,000 people wanted your product. So now you have 23,000 games you can't sell. So that's an issue. So with Kickstarter, it's like, I know 2,000 people want my game, period. I'm going to take excess money from that would be considered profit. I'm going to make more games because it's going to cost me less than it is to sell these things. And I'm going to make 500 to 1,000 extra copies of these things to sell into the market because I have enough confidence that we'll sell that. Like with Wander, we had product stacked up for like 2 or 3 years after the game initially came out in 2017 to have copies of it to sell. I think there's a few dragging around, but because it's not one of the 2,000 titles that comes out a year, they move on to the new hot thing. But we produced an amount that we felt comfortable going to conventions and selling online. So that's something you got to keep in mind. But beyond that, actually shipping the game. So a lot of your manufacturers will know to ship your product. Like you basically will have contracts stating, we're going to pay you X amount to produce the game. And then they're also going to be able to get it to a shipping depot, like a port somewhere. And basically what you'll do from there is you'll look up a certain company that can handle shipping stuff. Like there's a company called Ship Naked that was really nice to us at the beginning of this process. And there's also a game company called Quartermaster Logistics or QML. Those are the two guys we've worked with. I like Quartermaster a lot, but they basically, like, think about it this way. How do you get thousands of copies of a game from China to, with us, worldwide? How do you get it to, Europe? How do you get it to America? How do you get it to Canada? Well, you got to get that stuff, you got to put it on a crate, and then you got to pay for that crate to go to a port city, and then from a central hub start shipping out from there. It's a nightmare. It's a lot of work, and you do not want to do it yourself. So you pay people a good amount of money, which I think in our case with Shovel Knight was like $70,000 or so. And you pay them to get that stuff shipped out there. And then you charge people for shipping. Never ship something for free. Never, ever ship something for free, because it's an expected cost for you to not have to absorb that. And people are willing. Like, I had one guy say on Kickstarter, he said I was holding his game hostage because we were charging him for shipping. And I was like, dude, this is how the entire industry works. Like, if someone's not charging for shipping, they're screwing themselves, especially when they're small scale. So yeah, that's, sorry, I'm going down the rabbit hole of production woes. But the truth be told is that when you get your first production box from your manufacturer and you're staring at this big, beautiful game you've made, and you suddenly realize, like, oh my God, like 2,000 people plus are going to be holding this and playing it and enjoying themselves. That part of it, like when it starts getting out there and people start posting about it on social media, or they show painted miniatures that you designed and things like that, that part is a hard feeling to replace. There's just a sense of pride that goes along with that. But that's a self-publishing side of things.
I have a corollary question, and I know Jacob, you had one as well.
Yeah.
But real quickly, how did you handle distribution? Because there is the shipping, but then you need to get your game in like game shops or Target, or how did you approach distribution?
So distribution is interesting, because it's like any business, there's small fish and then there's big fish. So we mainly got distribution for some of the smaller fish at the beginning of the process. And later on at my time at Panda Call, we started kind of breaching into the bigger boys. So what I was told by one of the smaller fish, who basically was like, you guys are going to go big. You guys are doing everything right and you're doing it correctly, and these are the reasons why. We had a good product. Step one, good product. Step two, good attitude about your product, good presence. So it sounds strange, but being personable to a degree, even if you can fake it, is a good quality. Like being likable. Like if you met someone you were demoing a game to and they were, forgive me, an ass, you don't want to deal with that guy. But if you meet someone and they're showing you a game and they've got good energy about it and they're really excited, and like I played a game with a guy who it was a game about undead mobsters, and he put on this like mobster voice, and like he made the game fun to play and fun to see. Like it helps sell the thing. So there's a certain amount of showmanship that goes with it. But distributors at these conventions, which a lot of conventions will sell you a 10 by 10 booth space. It's expensive to do, but a lot of them have like an intro area, like a small set over to the side where you can get like a 5 by 10 or 10 by 10 booth that's small, so you can actually show off your game on a cheaper level, because that they're trying to bring in new business too, right? They got juggernauts buying 40 by 40 square booths like Paizo and D&D and stuff, but there's always room for little guys to get a space in there. So you get a booth space at a convention to show off your game, or you share booth space with a company, which you've got to know those guys. Then you're not gonna, that's gonna be a tough thing. Like you can't just go to a company and say, like, you want to share a booth? They're gonna be like, no. Like, I fought for this booth for 10 years. No, get out of here. But if you can get an intro level booth and start working your way into the system, which a lot of conventions have exhibitors at whateverconvention.com, you can email those guys and say like, hey, I'm a new company. Can we get space at your show? Or can we get a 10 by 10 booth? And then they'll give you more information from there. But distributors will notice and they'll take notes, and you won't know exactly who they are. Most of the time they'll have a shirt on, like PhD is one, Peach State Hobby Distributors. They're one of the smaller scale guys, but the distributor we worked with there was super educational, because he said, like, You guys are here every year. You've got a good product. You're going out there. You're putting feet on the pavement. You're selling your thing. You're doing good. You're having a presence. They like that. They like knowing that you're working hard to sell the product. So those guys found us at conventions and started talking to us. And then we started talking to more and more big league distributors. Like we talked to a group out of Canada that was interested in picking up 1,000 copies of Wander, which we didn't have. So I had to say, we have 250. And they're like, we'll take what we can get. And I'm like, cool, let's go. Like, you know, they may make an order and you may be able to like undersell that order. But like, I think with Shovel Knight, we ended up selling basically everything that we had produced over stock to distribution. Because it's like, I'll take a fat paycheck out of nowhere. Let's go. Because like you're making money off of it anyways. Just distribution will cut into that money, but it's still better to make it in one big swoop than to have to stretch it out through the entire year. But yeah, distributors will pay attention to you if you are at conventions doing stuff. I wouldn't recommend just shipping them something out of the blue, because that's not creating hype. You almost have to create hype, and then they kind of daisy chain off of that. And they have their own sales teams. Like they have guys who are going to shops or doing stuff online, and they'll promote your product for you to stores. But it's up to you to get your thing out there initially to show people like, hey, we got this thing and it's really cool and it'll be great. Like when we were working with Shovel Knight, we had distributors asking us questions like, well, what's Shovel Knight's sales numbers? And we're like, oh, we don't know. So then we had to contact them and they're like, oh, we've sold 2 million units. And we're just like, so then we send that along, and then that gives them all the faith in the world that they're going to sell this product. And then they're like, well, you know, we want 2,000 copies of X, Y, and Z. And so that's the general process of how that works. But as far as getting them, it's having a presence at shows and going out and putting it in front of people as much as you can. Like it's a lot of upfront costs for you as a small publisher. That's why a lot of people go the publishing house route, where they are a company. Like let's say it's like Pandacult Games is a design house. Well, then all of a sudden, instead of us producing games, we would use our capabilities and skills to then sell a game or produce a game on contract for another company, who would then give us a percentage of their overall sales. And then we would get an upfront signing bonus. Like, you know, you get X right now for working on this with us to kind of carry you through until our game gets out there and starts selling. And then we'll give you 6% of whatever the overall gross sales are. And then that happens over time. And you don't make a lot of money off of that, but when you think of designing 4 games for 4 different companies, and you're starting to make royalties off of all that stuff, things start adding up pretty quickly. That's why Shovel Knight licenses their stuff out so much. But they're also really smart and really picky about it. I learned with Shovel Knight, we ended up beating out a much bigger company for the game license, like a card game company, who wanted to make a board game, but Shovel Knight was like, nah, you can make a card game. You guys do card games, you make a card game. So we're showing off our Shovel Knight licensed product at Gen Con, and these guys come up, and I don't know who they are, but they're pissed. That's all I know. And they're like, show me the game, show me Shovel Knight. We're like, okay, like this is just a customer to me. So I'm like, yeah, it's Shovel Knight. And they're like, no, show me the mechanic. And I was like, what? I'm like, show me the side-scrolling mechanic. So I showed it to him, and I was like, well, you know, one tile goes off, one tile goes on. It's dead simple. It doesn't sound revolutionary at all, and it wasn't to us, but the guy got furious and stomped off because like we had this neat design gimmick that made it feel like the actual game, and they just had cards fighting other cards. So it was this really interesting thing. Like you'd be surprised how far your ideas can go, especially when it comes to distribution and getting licenses.
Okay. No, thank you. So I think Ru had a question, and then Lucas, I see your so Ru.
I mean, most of the distribution question was answered. So I guess my question now is, you talked a lot about how at one point you had to delve almost all of your paycheck into moving forward and everything, and that must have been a really tough spot.
Yeah.
How do you and your team keep strong group cohesion and enough will and motivation to push through and realize that it's still worth working on, that the product is still good enough to keep pushing through even in such a dire situation?
That's an incredibly good question. honesty is a big part of it. Honesty and having a clear understanding of what your goals are and what your responsibilities are. Because I've learned from mistakes what those solutions are. If you're working with a team of people, I'd suggest not working with someone that's your best friend, but because if you're hanging out with someone and also working with them for like 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day or 15 to 20 hours a day, you may eventually want to murder that person for doing ridiculous things. But really, when it comes down to it, it's having a collective goal in mind. Like, you're making a product, you're enjoying it, you're trying to do things. Like, the smaller your company is, the easier it is to keep that cohesion and that clear vision. You've all got to agree, you've all got to be very open about your communication. But I think the most important thing is having a fair breakdown of the workload, because that's what I discovered at a certain point, and that was a lot of big adjustments. Was I discovered that I was doing about 70% of the work, and I was taking the same amount of payment that my partner was. So that's unfair, ultimately, if you think about it. And we had a discussion about it, and ultimately, like, I started kind of healing back. But part of the problem is that when you're producing board games, there's a lot of room for things and there's some money to be made, but you almost got to think about it like a hobby business instead of anything else. Because there's some guys that have been doing it for 15 years and just got to a point where they're making full-time money off of it. I know one guy who was like a financial analyst who was also a game designer, and it's a guy behind a company called Smirk and Dagger. They make a really funny games where it's like backstabby or front stabby, depending. But he eventually got to a stage where he was like, I'm quitting my job. He's got 2 kids, so he quit his job and started making board games, and he had enough stuff and distribution and other things happening that he could kind of step off and take that leap. But the biggest thing is having good, reliable teams that know their roles and they fit those roles well. Like, I had to wear a hat of every single job in the business simultaneously at the same time. It can get exhausting. But if you can kind of break up those responsibilities, especially at the beginning, eventually you would be able to bring more people on, even if it's part-time or contract work, to start doing things like, we got big enough that we could hire a social media manager. Guess what? Outside of me and my partner, that was the number one thing we needed, was someone to once a week or twice a week go on all social media platforms and start posting about our stuff. Because I couldn't keep up with it. I was working like a part-time job, and also I had 6 to 8 hours every day worrying about production or shipping or some other nightmare. So that's the biggest thing. Like, if you've got an artist that's working on your project that's part of the team, there's a certain point where it's like, maybe you have an artist that's working on those designs, and if they can help with rules development or something, that's kind of cool. Or you have a graphic designer. I think it's a little tough, to tell you the truth, because you have to wear so many hats at the beginning. But yeah, I think a clear goal and clear cohesion, that's one of the things I had with my partner at the time that was a sore point, was an understanding of what the business was and wasn't. So we, in my mind, because I had a job and I was doing concept art on the side, and then I had this third thing coming into play with the board game stuff. I basically, in my mind, it was a hobby business. Like I said, it was something that I planned to make a little bit of supplemental income to help out with some things and make cool stuff, because that was the goal. I didn't realize that my partner had decided that that was his life's work. He was going to sacrifice so much of his time and energy and work and stop looking for freelance work to delve into the business. And he didn't tell me that. So we got to a point where I was paying myself, or we were paying ourselves, which was great, because at the beginning we couldn't, because we were making things out of a garage, basically. But there was a point where we were paying ourselves, and I had a job and was doing freelance concept artwork. So I was being paid well enough on my own, which was great. It was the only way I could do any of it. But I discovered at one point that he basically stopped doing his freelance work to work on our board game company stuff. And he couldn't pay himself. Like, he couldn't pay his mortgage. And if the company, Panda Cult, like, we hit one really hard patch where I think we had $3,000 in the bank account. Like, we were a company producing a massive board game and we had $3,000 in our bank account. Like, that is scary. The good news is that the only reason it was that low is we were getting ready to go to a convention, Gen Con, and then we made $10,000 at the show. So, but you know, there's a number. If you're financing a company, there's a number that you get below, and you have a panic attack, and we were below it. But yeah, it got to a point where I stopped paying myself. And my partner financially couldn't afford to not do that, and it put a huge strain on the business. Just our relationship as two people, because all of a sudden I'm not getting paid for my efforts, which, as I told you, was a huge percentage. And then he was still getting paid for doing less. So that part was a bit of a hit, but eventually we divvied up responsibilities better. I ended up getting back payment for the time that I put in. And we got to a point where conventions were actually like bonus money almost. Like, we had game sales and Kickstarter profits, and then beyond all that, conventions, we could start actually like taking some money and spending it on ourselves. That was a really cool point when I think we walked home from a convention with $2,000 in our pocket each, just like bonus money to go and do some stuff. And oh, that was nice. Like, I had a hole in a tooth that I needed to get fixed, and I didn't do it for years because I was so focused on this business. So then I was like, I'm going to fix my face. Let's go. But yeah, I'd say really divvying up the jobs is important, but also, to tell you the truth, especially with everything going on right now, mental health. Taking care of your mental health. We lost our social media manager because of that. He just was going overboard, and he was trying to help on the back end of things out of his own kindness of his own heart, and he drove himself crazy. I don't say that as in he legitimately drove himself crazy. He just worked himself half to death and literally almost had a heart attack. And the guy was in his 20s. So literally, he's like, I can't do this. And I was like, that is fine. Go. You are okay. Because it's a different thing when it's your company. Like, it's almost like when someone has a kid, it's their kid versus someone else's kid. You take a bullet for your kid. You take a bullet for your company. You do anything for it to succeed, but you know, there's only so far someone else would go for you. So that's my suggestion. Divvy out jobs, keep control of your mental health. And if it doesn't work out, or if it's not good enough, or if it looks like a giant financial sink, get out. Like, the tabletop industry is cool, but it's not worth ruining your bank account. There's an old joke in board gaming, which is, how do you want to make $1 million in board games? Is you start with $2 million and then you burn through the other $1 million in a dumpster. Developing board games is expensive, especially when you get into the miniature side of things. But that's why I keep saying cards, cardboard, those two things, way cheaper to work on ultimately. Like, as an example, miniatures. Every single one of these guys, mass production metal tooling cost $1,000 each. We have 32 models, $32,000 at the gate to get metal tooling that we own, but each one of these costs $1,000 to mass produce. And that's to get the model ready, that's to break it into pieces, that's to get tooling, not to mention the sculpting costs, which is around $500 a pop. And then if you think about that with actual artwork, like I said, I charge about $250 a pop. So you're looking at $2,000 roughly per sculpt for designs overall. It gets bonkers. That's just the numbers game. That part was actually kind of fun, which is weird to say. Like, you start learning and you're like, oh, cool, we're just going to drop 32 grand on this. Like, I sent some big checks, guys. I sent some big hairy checks. And like, when you make like $250,000 on a Kickstarter campaign, and then you send $140,000 check to a company to produce like a chunk of that game, you're like, like your bank account just goes. But no, it's once you start like sending regular payments to you and your partner and all that stuff, it gets a lot cooler. It gets a whole hell of a lot cooler.
Awesome.
Thank you a lot.
Lucas, do you have a question?
Yeah, and you were just starting to answer it. It's about the miniature side of things because I'm really into digital sculpting. And I loved the miniatures you created for Wander. And I was wondering, when you say hand sculpted, do you literally mean like
Yes.
and then you make the mold out of that or
Yes,
something?
100%. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum. So I'll go into that. So Patrick Keith is a traditionalist. He actually has gone more 3D now because that's just the way the industry is going. It's so much easier with 3D printers because the technology like is getting so much cheaper to produce a high quality production ready model in no time. Like 3D sculpting is absolutely the way it's going to go for the future. But at the time, this is 2017, 2015, roughly around that time. 3D printers existed and they were good. We were getting like SLA 3D printers, which is the pulling from resin versions of it, instead of like filament building it up. I've seen both versions do it incredibly well. But yeah, we knew Patrick. Like I shared a booth with him before. He's like the most charismatic guy I've ever met. But we were talking to him and he saw some of the minis I got sculpted for that very first Kickstarter I was telling you guys about, the $7,500 one. And he kind of was bummed. He was like, hey, why didn't you come to me about that? And I was like, because I didn't think that was in your style portfolio. And then, I mean, I'm not kidding. A week after my Kickstarter ended, he launched one, which I think someone, either his wife or a painter he knew, did the character designs for, but it was like Wander-esque. It was animals and armor. But he did his own Kickstarter for his own thing, which, you know, I wasn't offended by. Like, it's the board game industry is competitive to a degree, but everyone's kind of friendly with each other. So after that, we were like, well, our next project will work with you. So that turned out to be Wander. And I sent him designs and he was like, well, do you want me to work traditionally or 3D? And I was like, well, what's the advantages? He's like, he said he's quicker with traditional and he was just getting into 3D sculpting. So we were like, I was like, Patrick, I love you, dude. Do the thing you're strongest at. I want your best production. That's it. And he's sculpted for mass production before. So the thing you need to understand about designing for 3D, which, you know, if you're doing 3D sculpts, you already know, is that for production stuff, when you're casting for a model, it's not just, you know, this sucker is a great example. I'll sit behind it so you can actually see. So this guy's a great example. So when you're actually casting for a model, this is the way you need to think about it being produced, upside down, because the idea is that it's going into a resin mold that's being cut in certain ways so that you can pour the material in, it'll harden, then you open the mold and pop the thing out. That's with most production methods. So Patrick he actually cast resin for his own minis, for his own production line. So he knew exactly how to sculpt it, he knew how to pose it, he knew how to cut it. So he was this invaluable, legendary resource that we're like, well, you know how to cut this stuff for me. Please, could you do it? So he ended up hand sculpting and hand cutting everything in the line. And then you want to talk about a scary shipment? We packed that in a box, paid $300 in insurance fees, because it was like thousands of dollars. I think it was like 10 grand or 15 grand worth of work we were sending their way, and ended up getting him to get that over to China, and then they took the physical copies and actually diced them up and made it amazing. Like it was really interesting how they did that. But for Shovel Knight was a completely different process, because at that point, that was me working with a younger artist who didn't have as much experience, but was really good at kind of cartoony, chibi stuff, which Shovel Knight is. And Shovel Knight also had the distinct challenge of the models being, I don't know if you've ever seen the art for Shovel Knight, nothing's touching the ground. It's all floating. Everything looks like it's like mid, like 80s high school jump, like, yeah. Nothing's actually planted on the ground. So I had to literally sketch and redesign every single character design that they had to work with being planted on the ground, because, you know, it's a model. It has to have a base to go on to actually stand up. Because if you don't, the thing's just going to tip over. So you have to think about balancing issues and all sorts of other things. So Shovel Knight, I actually had to hold the sculptor's hand to a certain degree to get them to cut things in certain ways and produce things in certain ways to tweak these designs, these like, you know, existing fantastic designs. How to get them to break them apart and actually settle on things and accept the changes I made, and basically had to tell them in the cockiest way I could, like, I know what I'm doing, let me fix this so it's sculptable. And they'd like get really focused on little details, like, oh, well, the spike on this helmet's not tall enough. And I'm like, well, that's not a castable spike anymore, because you got to pour resin into a mold. If you make a big old spike on it, the plastic may not get all the way down into that spike, and then you'll just have a like rounded mold anyways. There's a point of contention on one of the designs for Shovel Knight. But yeah, it was working with sculptors who can actually understand producing something in 3D, producing something for a resin mold, understand where cuts and stuff are and how to key those cuts. By that, I mean, you cut a character's arms off for production because they're at weird wonky angles. Well, that hole, that arm connected to, like if it's a Games Workshop model, it may be just a rounded sphere so that that person can glue that thing in whatever position they want. But if it's like a mass production board game where you're not worried about the positioning, you key that hole like in an L shape so that that thing pops out and pops back in, due to the fact that a person who's never seen this thing before is putting it together with glue in another country. So they need to have a guide, need to know like, oh, well, this is an L-shaped hole. So the L thing, it's almost like designing it for a little kid to put it together. So those are things those are things that you've got to have in mind. But no, 3D sculpting is really, really cool. And it's definitely the way the industry is going. Like if you're a talented 3D sculptor, you are a priority. Like people are going to want to work with you. And like with the question about getting a job in the industry, same thing. Show your work if you can. Get like a little 3D video of the thing and show it off to people on an iPad or, you know, tablet, whatever device you've got. Sculptors are in pretty high demand because everyone needs to get something sculpted. I'll tell you that right now. It's a commodity, and it's a really good commodity. But yeah, and if you've got any more questions about it, it's one of the, like, besides concept art, the sculpting and producing of sculpts, it's actually one of the things I like specialized in. I wish I could sculpt, God help me, but then I'd go crazy because I'd be designing and then sculpting and then producing the thing, and there wouldn't be a production chain left.
There are not enough hours in the day for all of this.
No,
stuff.
there's not. I gotta sleep at some point.
Oh, come on, sleep is overrated. Do we have more questions? Anybody? Okay, I think
I have a quick follow-up one. I just wanted to make sure no one else had one. It was about the sculpting again, just specifically with hand sculpting. How many iterations do you have to go through if you're hand sculpting? Because digital sculpting, you can just undo it if you make a big mistake.
I think it just depends. It depends on the process. It's almost like with concept art. Like if someone's working on, like if I'm working on a character design and I've made a giant mistake, which God knows I have plenty of times, way too many times. If I know I've made a mistake and it's my fault, I just offer to do this, the redesign or the artwork tweaking for free. But if it's like, if I do a character design and the client says, well, you know, I want that arm position to change. I'm like, okay, so I've worked into contracts before where I'm like, well, you get 3 small adjustments, but if you want anything really heavily done, then I'm going to charge you half the overall design to do that. Because it's like at that time, you're burning my time and yours, and I need to get paid for these changes. It also kind of spooks them into thinking like, oh, well, we better get this right. But I give every opportunity in the world. I show them like, hey, this is a rough sculpt of what I've done. Like sculpting is a little bit different because I've had sculptors show me progress images. Like as an example, Plague Knight from Shovel Knight is he's got like a plague mask and a cape, but the design I did for him has this like really big arcing smoke plume from like a grenade he's throwing, but he's like touching the grenade and the smoke plume like goes up over him. And he's basically free floating. Let me see if I can. Oh crap! He's nowhere near me. but like when I saw the initial design, you know, I'm the one responsible for taking that 2D to 3D and understanding what looks right. The sculptor's trying their best because they're trying to translate that, but it's ultimately up to me as the art director to go, that looks right, that looks wrong. So he's just making an attempt, but it's not until I see that attempt before I can go, okay, well, this needs to be tweaked a little bit. As an example, some of the artists I've worked with are horrifically underpaid and abused. I pay artists properly. So as an example, as a new sculptor, and this is a couple of years ago, so take it with a grain of salt, I know guys who are charging anywhere from $350 to $550 for a sculpt of a single character. And that's with adjustments and edits and things like that. Heriberto was trying to charge me $150 because that's what he was used to getting paid from a certain individual. That kind of pissed me off because I was a freelance artist before an art director. So I told him, we're going to pay you $300 and you're going to give me all of your attention. And he said, okay, because, you know, I just offered him double what he normally made. So because it was a licensed property, I knew I had to pay him more because they were going to be painfully specific. So they had moments where they were like, well, his hand needs to finger needs to go like at this angle or this. Like they were so focused on matching the art. I had to get in a fight with them often to make that work. But as far as like changing aspects and elements of the design, I think if you're showing them rough aspects of it overall, generally it should be easier in the process. So you're not like killing yourself when you get to like a super finite detail stage. Instead, you're getting them in like a rougher stage. So it's more workable. You got to give them more opportunities to do that. But when it really comes down to it, you got to be ready to make changes. Like no product is going to be perfect the first time out. Trust me, I've had hundreds of designs where they're all of a sudden like, well, this lady's like hips are like a foot too wide from where they need to be. And then I look at the design after the fact, I'm like, crap, they're right. And then I have to go back and fix it. But that's the biggest thing. I think it's really up to you, but contracts are important. Contracts keep everyone on the same page. You can download contracts on like general artist contracts online that will protect you and the client from understanding like I said, I have a contract that says I'll make 3 changes. And if you want anything that's like the top half or lower half, like half the design needs to change, then you're paying me for that change. But I'll make this many adjustments for free and you'll get to see it during all of these rough stages. And it's to have an understanding with these people that you're working with. But over the years, there's also a couple of clients I've got that they're like, hey, we need a design. I'm like, okay, and just blast something out and then they'll send me money. And, you know, that's only because I built up a trust with them. I had one company that literally I did like $4,000 worth of work for. And I didn't know that they were having financial issues and that their accounting guy was cooking the books. And we discovered that after the fact. And I basically demanded payment and the guy who ran the company had to pay me out of his own pocket. But at the same time, I had a hole in the tooth that I was trying to get fixed. Between the convention and that money, yay. But yeah, it's just about protecting yourself. That's all contracts really are.
Awesome. Well, that was super interesting, Heath. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and kind of like share your experience.
Yeah, listen. I love it, and I'll ramble on all day about it if you give me.
Next time, I will lift the Wonder case myself.
Sounds good.
Like as I said, like I delayed buying it because of the pandemic, and it was difficult to find players. But now that players are back,
yes,
we are going to Wonder.
Well,
thank you very much.
Broken character classes or combos, just let me know. I can give you some insight.
Yeah, and anytime you are in Savannah, let me know. You're not too far, and I would love to take you out and then potentially maybe see one of those classes. I will. A lot of these students are about to kind of start their own board game, which will be finished in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'll send you pictures.
Yeah, I'd love to see them. I was, like I said, I was so impressed when I was down there, and I just saw the quality of these things. Like, it was amazing. And 4 weeks. So you guys know, normal game development is 1 year to 2 years, especially for something big. You know, a little simpler card game, maybe a little bit easier to do. Like, it looked professional. I don't know how they all played because they didn't have that kind of time, but you know, producing a good looking product was not an issue. That was a cool part.
Yeah. No, I mean they are talented. So again, I can't wait to be able to share their work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I will download the video most likely tomorrow and make a few edits, and then we'll post it on YouTube. For those of you that were not able to be with us live, there will be a version on YouTube.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Heath. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye.
Guys.